with Walter Cronkite. And Eric Seberine in Washington, Daniel Shore in Washington, George Herman in Memphis, Bob Gregory in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, Richard Threlkeld in Vung Tau, South Vietnam, and Charles Carrault on the road tonight in Majestic Canyon, California.
Good evening. The Johnson administration finally said it out loud today, officially charging that South Vietnam is the major immediate obstacle in the way of the Paris talks. The blunt language came from Defense Secretary Clark Clifford at a Washington news conference. And he said that the Thieu regime continues its opposition to the talks, then the United States should proceed without it. More on the story from CBS News correspondent Daniel Shore.
Clifford spoke of Saigon with anger as great as he's ever shown in public, charging President Thieu with a last-minute pullout on October 29th from an agreement made weeks before to accept the bombing halt and send a delegation to Paris.
The only reason that Thieu gave that he couldn't go along with this deal was because he said he didn't have time to get his delegation to Paris by Saturday, November the 2nd. That was the only reason that he gave. Now, here's the position the president was in on Thursday. I might say I feel it strongly because I see what he had to go through. He worked through 5.5 months to reach an agreement that he thought could be a major step toward peace. And then in the last out of the 9th inning, why, suddenly they say, no, we can't go along. Now, I think the president felt, he had to proceed with his plan. He was committed. He'd made the commitment to Hanoi. Vance and Harriman had put their word on the line, and I think he felt he had to go ahead. In addition to that, after all that we have done in that country, after the enormous contribution that's been made, with the knowledge that we had gotten to the point where we had the sort of agreement that we'd been working toward, I believe the president was absolutely right in not giving Saigon a veto on the plan. I think the president owed it under his constitutional duty. I think he owed it to the American people to proceed with the talks. Now, I say that I believe we should make every reasonable effort to demonstrate to Saigon why it should come in and join the talks. At the same time, if they choose not to, I believe the president has the constitutional responsibility of proceeding with the talks. There are a great many subjects that can be covered between the United States and Hanoi of a military nature, and that's our real function. We've been there as a military shield for South Vietnam. I have not anticipated that we would get into the political settlement of South Vietnam. That's up to South Vietnam and Hanoi.
Clifford said that while waiting for Saigon, arrangements can be worked out with Hanoi to reduce fighting and withdraw some forces on both sides, and he praised President Johnson's decision to go ahead.
Mind you, he did not pick the day to announce this. This had been brought about by the decision on the part of Hanoi that they now felt that there should be a break and that we ought to get on with it. And when the offer was made and the offer was accepted, it was up to the president to proceed with it because the opportunity of ending the war was of infinitely greater importance than any possible political consideration.
Not since President Kennedy denounced the Diem regime in 1963 has the U.S. administration so publicly arraigned the Saigon government. The aim now is not a change of regime, but of policy. It is now an open fight to force Saigon to the peace table. Daniel Shore, CBS News, Washington.
Well, Dan, perhaps Clifford's words haven't soaked in yet, but reports from Paris tonight said Saigon still is not ready to sit at that peace table. And thus the opening of the expanded talks, already a week late, appeared certain to be postponed again. By the way, the Defense Secretary mentioned the recent enemy shelling of South Vietnamese cities and the rocket attacks on U.S. forces from inside the demilitarized zone. He said that while they indeed violated the understandings leading to the bombing halt, they were not in themselves serious enough to prompt the resumption of the bombing. Clifford, who has been defense secretary only since last spring, was asked about the likelihood of his staying on under the Nixon administration, and he said the possibility is so remote that it did not warrant comment. He said he did suggest to Nixon that he choose a new man as soon as possible so that he could be fully briefed before taking office. President-elect Nixon today named a key campaign aide, Bryce Harlow, to be a White House assistant, a liaison man with Congress. Harlow, who served in the Eisenhower administration, said he foresees no major problems in working with the Democratic Congress, and he said Nixon is optimistic about having good relations on Capitol Hill.
Do you remember what it was like learning to write? It was one of the most awkward things you ever faced. But in time, you did learn. And it was a good way to communicate. Today in business, it isn't good enough. It isn't fast enough. So now it's time to learn something that is. At first, you'll feel awkward with dictation equipment. But with IBM equipment, you just talk over your mistakes. You'll be dictating letters 4 times faster than you're now writing them in about a week, which isn't bad, considering it took you 2 years of grade school to learn to write.
In Memphis, the trial of James Earl Ray, charged in the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., was postponed today for almost 4 months and may be delayed even longer. The move, granted the day the trial was to have started, followed Ray's last-minute change in lawyers. George Herman reports.
Ray's new lawyer, Percy Foreman, asked Judge Battle for 90 days to study the case before even meeting to try to set a new date. The state objected and asked to go to trial at once. Judge Battle asked the two sides to try to agree upon a mutually satisfactory date, and when they failed, he himself set the 3rd of March as the tentative date for the trial to begin if Foreman could be ready by then. Foreman emerged apparently satisfied with the date that was set and with the court's order to lawyer Arthur Haynes to turn over his private files on the Ray case.
I just as soon have this date as anything else if I can be ready by then. I have no desire to continue the case unnecessarily.
What cooperation will you get from Mr. Haynes?
I have no reason to believe that I will not receive the full cooperation of Mr. Haynes. Any lawyer is trained to follow the orders of the court, and I really think I would have obtained that cooperation from Mr. Haynes without an order of the court, although he thought otherwise. But I'm sure that was just a first reaction to the unhappy situation, and I'm just as unhappy about it as he is.
Arthur Haynes, fired from the case at the last possible moment, emerged to say that Ray had done it deliberately, largely just to delay things, and that he expected good relations with the new lawyer.
Well, Mr. Foreman, no doubt, is a great lawyer. He's had great success.
Are you going to give him the files that he requested?
I will comply with the court's order, gentlemen. Yes, sir. I will do that.
In other words, you will treat him as though you would like to have someone treat you.
Exactly. That's my theory. Yes, sir.
There's no animosity whatsoever?
None whatsoever, gentlemen. No animosity between me and Ray or me and Mr. Foreman whatsoever, gentlemen. This happens in every courthouse in America every day.
Lawyer Foreman promptly set out to try to find a Tennessee lawyer to assist him in the case, and also to sample public opinion in Memphis and see whether his client can get a fair trial here or whether he should ask for a change of location before the 3rd of March. George Herman, CBS News in Memphis.
A severe pre-winter storm moved along the eastern seaboard today with rain and ice, snow, and unusually high winds stretching from the Carolinas to New England. Freezing temperatures reached the Gulf Coast, and there were tornadoes across northern Florida. Winds of hurricane force and above struck along the mid-Atlantic states, pushing tides 6 feet above normal. Many coastal areas were flooded. Heavy seas in New York Harbor kept 3 ferry boats with a total of several hundred passengers on board from docking for almost 2 hours. Off Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, the rough weather grounded a huge oil barge, and Bob Gregory has that story.
The waves were 16 feet high when the tow line broke this morning. Now they're about half as high. but the barge is almost ashore and the 2 men that were aboard are safe. The main danger now is thick oil, more than 1 million gallons. The oil is already leaking here, washing ashore and leaving evidence of possibly worse things to come. One of the 2 men on the barge was washed overboard to shore. He is hospitalized in fair condition. The other man was pulled off the barge by helicopter at mid-afternoon. The plan of the Coast Guard at this hour is to wait until the weather is reasonably good and the waves subside, and then to take the barge to a safe port. But the main danger, of course, is that the barge may break before the weather does. And if that happens, then countless miles of the Delaware coast and its many resort areas are going to be indefinitely ruined. Bob Gregory, CBS News, Rehoboth Beach, Delaware.
The passenger liner Oceanic, one of the larger luxury ships, was turned back during a cruise from New York to the Bahamas after a fire in her boiler room. The fire was put out quickly enough, but the captain says he wants repairs to be made in New York. The Oceanic reported carrying more than 1,000 passengers and a crew of about 600. It was to have arrived in Nassau today. Apollo 8 today received the official go-ahead to attempt man's first trip around the moon, with liftoff from Cape Kennedy tentatively set for December 21st. The plan calls for astronauts Frank Borman, James Lovell, and William Anders, shown here at Cape Kennedy last month, to complete the round trip in just over 6 days. If all goes well, they'll orbit the moon 10 times on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day without landing, and then return for splashdown in the Pacific. The astronauts hope to transmit television pictures of the moon's surface while in lunar orbit. It will be the first manned test of the giant Saturn V moon rocket, far larger and more powerful than launch vehicles used on any previous manned flights. It was reported today that at one point there was so much paperwork going on in the space program that officials temporarily lost track of 18 large rocket engines, worth altogether almost $500,000. The story comes from the General Accounting Office, which said the engines later were found stored in warehouses and that better record keeping since has gone into effect.
Well, the giant flightless bird you've just seen lived 50 million years ago.
Dad, I only had one.
One?
Cavity.
Splendid. Oh, he's proud.
He ought to be only one cavity. How'd you do it?
Well,
Mine changed to Crest.
of course, he brushed with Crest.
Are you sure Crest did it?
We used a lot of toothpaste, the Crest, and Historic. Check out.
Of the 5 leading toothpastes, only Crest has stannous fluoride to fight cavities.
Uh-huh, gotcha.
Caught me what?
Judy, you're always raving about Cheer, but you're not using it.
Oh, I always use Cheer in hot water. But see, this is a cold water wash.
Judy, Cheer even gets whites clean in cold water.
Whites? Come on.
It does. Cheer cleans and whitens better than any leading cold water detergent.
Any of them?
Yep.
So who needs a second detergent? Here, take this. Of course, Cheer in cold water. I should have known.
In the Vietnam War, the Saigon Command reported that U.S. Navy patrol boats attacked an enemy base in South Vietnam's southernmost province, destroying 141 sampans. And U.S. infantrymen rounded up 153 Viet Cong suspects in a raid on a village near Saigon. No American casualties reported in either action. In the air, B-52s again attacked the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos, a daily exercise since the bombing of North Vietnam was halted on November 1st. Tonight, we have a film report on another but little publicized aspect of American air power in Vietnam, the Mercy Airlift. Richard Threlkeld came across one such operation in the Mekong Delta.
They have come from all over the Delta, Vietnam's orphans who have been living on the charity of the local churches since their parents were killed, casualties of the Tet Offensive, the May Offensive, and the hundreds of little battles since then that nobody ever hears about. Some of them still carry their wounds, some are sick, and all of them are bound for a new home. For months they have been living in a tent village at Vinh Long, or in some 24 tiny orphanages scattered nearby, under constant threat from the Viet Cong. So they decided to move the orphans to the safest place in Vietnam, the military base at Vung Tau. The safest and most efficient way to move them was by helicopter. So on this bright Sunday morning, the Americans and the Australians did just that. moved a whole orphanage, orphans, nuns, baggage, and all, in 2 giant helicopters, the same helicopters that normally carry troops into combat, moved them 80 miles to the coast. In military fashion, they even christened the whole operation with a name, Little Lift. Most of the children were more interested in the view than in worrying about the strange new noise and the big shiny guns on board. The nurses probably could have handled the children well enough alone, but everywhere they went, there were soldiers waiting with outstretched arms, just for the chance to hold a little child for a few moments. What do you think of when you look at this little one?
I think she's precious. Something like this really makes me happy to be along on the trip.
Miss your own kids?
Yes, I do. Certainly do.
Remind you of your kids at all?
Well, about the same size. Loves her candy. That's a universal, I guess.
He's a cute little fella. They're all cute over here.
Make you a little homesick, does?
Yeah. I've only been away 4 months. I'm a little homesick already.
This one reminds you of some of your children?
All kids remind you of your own, don't you think?
They're brave little kids, aren't they?
They are. The way they just take to this air travel and they seem to get moved around the countryside. I suppose they're used to it after all these years of, war and that. They just get used to being moved around from place to place, and they just take it so philosophically. Here, you get a couple of them crying a bit, but they're stoic little kids.
You hope the heck this never happens to your kids.
I've written this home in almost every letter. But I hope it never happens to my kids, that they never even have to see what these kids have gone through in any way.
The soldiers and the children went by truck to the Anfong orphanage in Vung Tau, where the orphans will live for a few months until the government builds some new housing for them. All this doesn't mean very much when you're 3 or 4 years old and there's nobody around left to call Mommy and Daddy. The best thing about all this is perhaps that these kids and a few American daddies who haven't seen their own kids in quite some time spend a few hours together. That's good therapy all the way around. Richard Threlkeld, CBS News, Vung Tau, South Vietnam.
General Lyman Lemnitzer, the supreme Allied commander in Europe, warned the NATO allies today that the Soviet bloc invasion of Czechoslovakia has shifted the balance of military power in Central Europe. Lemnitzer, speaking in Brussels, said that to counter the red buildup, the West is going to have to be prepared to spend more money for the training, equipping, and mobilization of its own military forces. In Prague today, the government announced what it called temporary limitations on travel out of the country by Czechoslovak citizens. Observers said the primary reason for the travel curb was to prevent another exodus by scientists and intellectuals opposed to Soviet-imposed restrictions.
Many times when you're having fun, a headache starts and grows until your joy is a thing of the past. That's when Bayer works wonders. Bayer aspirin is 100% aspirin, and aspirin is the strongest pain-relieving ingredient you can buy. Bayer works wonders.
When you have acid indigestion, every second counts. So count on instant-acting Phillips tablets. Phillips tablets go to work in seconds. With one of the fastest stomach settlers ever discovered, each small Phillips tablet neutralizes more excess stomach acid than the leading antacid tablet that comes in a roll. So for fast relief from acid-upset stomach, when every second counts, count on instant-acting Phillips tablets.
The Supreme Court today, 43 years after the famous Tennessee monkey trial, ruled that states may not forbid the teaching of evolution in public schools. The unanimous decision in a case from Arkansas said such laws violate the First Amendment guarantee of freedom of religion. In the court's words, it is clear that fundamentalist sectarian conviction was and is the law's reason for existence. Only Arkansas and Mississippi still have such laws on the books. Eric Severide in Washington has some thoughts on the state of international relations and Washington's policy in this field. Eric?
This government is now trying to get back on all fours with its quasi-allies, the government of South Vietnam, and its quasi-enemies, the government of the Soviet Union. The business in hand this summer was interrupted by the Czechoslovak invasion, the bomb halt, and the election. The election was the least of the unsettling events as things have turned out, since the president-elect has now said that President Johnson speaks for him, too, in these foreign dealings, at least until January 20. This is a help to the president, but it would have been damaging all around if Mr. Nixon had said anything different. As things now stand, the Saigon regime cannot expect to use Mr. Nixon to change the American line on who represents whom at the Paris peace talks. And Secretary of Defense Clifford went out of his way today to put more heat on Saigon. His statements also seem designed to discourage the idea that the president's call for the bomb halt was timed with the November 5th election chiefly in mind. The argument here seems to be that while things may not have been all tidied up with Saigon then, they would never be at any stage short of a force play by the United States, that we have now reached the showdown with Saigon that had to come sooner or later. The Vietnam War is hopefully wearing out. What may be of much greater consequence to the whole world in the long run is the halting of the nuclear arms race between Washington and Moscow. President Johnson, after months of quiet diplomacy, had the Russians' agreement to get down to business on this at a summit meeting this fall. The overturn in the Kremlin and the invasion of Czechoslovakia, just hours before the summit announcement was to be made, aborted the whole business. This, as one high officer here said at the time, was stark tragedy for everyone. Another chill was thrown into this capital when Mr. Nixon, about 2 weeks before the election, called for a step up in the nuclear arms race. This government seems convinced there is no future, no safety in that line for anyone, only potential bankruptcy. Mr. Nixon now says the president speaks for him, too, in these negotiations. Mr. Johnson will surely speak to the Russians in tones very different from that pre-election speech of Mr. Nixon's. The people still in high office here hope and tend to believe that once in power, Mr. Nixon, however quietly, will go along with existing policy in this fateful matter. Walter?
Prices advanced sharply on the New York Stock Exchange today in heavy trading. Volume was 17.25 million shares. The exchange index gained 41 cents.
It wasn't too long ago. If you smoked a reduced tar cigarette, you were pretty much alone in the world. But something's happened. Things have changed. You're not alone anymore. You're not alone because today there's True. More smokers every day are changing to True filter cigarettes. Changing to the good feel of a built-in mouthpiece. Changing to True's air filtration system. Changing to a reduced tar and nicotine cigarette that tastes like a cigarette. True filter cigarettes, with or without menthol. Shouldn't your brand be True?
Charles Corral, on the road, has brought us many different sights and sounds from all over the country, but none quite like what he found in one small area of the far west. Charles?
Just listen for a minute. The only sounds that penetrate this lovely canyon in Southern California are the calls of the birds and the sound of your own footsteps. This is where you come to find Mrs. Elizabeth Kenny, the hummingbird lady. Mrs. Kenny lives here with her husband, Jerry. Their neighbors are the scrub jay and the sharp-shinned hawk and the orange-crowned warbler and the crow and the swift and the swallow and hundreds of hummingbirds. The proper name of this lyrical place is the Tucker Wildlife Sanctuary of the Cal State Fullerton Foundation. But that is too much of a mouthful for the bird lovers and ornithologists from every state who have come here to watch the birds hover about Mrs. Kenny's porch. They think of it as the house of the hummingbird lady, which is also how the hummingbirds think of it. Every hummingbird between Alaska and Costa Rica knows the address, and they drop in, often, it seems, all at the same time. The hummingbird lady makes them welcome.
Do you ever get bored? out here where it's so peaceful and quiet?
No, one keeps busy. People who say, how did you get a job like this? Think that all I do is sit on the porch and see what comes, but there's more to it than meets the eye. It takes 5 pounds of sugar every other day made into syrup to feed the hummingbirds this time of year. In summer, we fill those feeders 4 and 5 times a day.
I'm surprised to discover that hummingbirds really hum.
It's their wings that make all that fuss. Sometimes it sounds like a small electric motor. Their wings revolve instead of flap like other birds. And they're jointed at the shoulders like your wrists. They move in either direction. A double power stroke. They can go twice as fast as other birds.
They are really small, aren't they?
Hummingbird is the smallest bird, I think. The one you're seeing weighs about ½ an ounce or less. If you've held a dime, you've held something heavier.
The hummingbirds don't seem to be overly fond of one another.
All birds claim a territory. And with the hummingbird, at this place, of course, it's a feeder that he claims. I think half their vocabulary is swear words.
Most Americans live their lives to the sound of traffic noise and industry. Your sounds are a little different, aren't they?
One has to get used to them. When we first moved here, it was too peaceful. We couldn't sleep. Now when we go into town, we don't hear the birds at night, the fox bark. We don't sleep downtown now.
This house is not very far from the freeways and the shopping centers around which most of Southern California's life revolves. Life here moves at a different pace. Here, trees and birds and animals may live. It is only 10 acres. It seems an enchanted forest. Charles Kuralt, CBS News, Modjeska Canyon, California.
And that's the way it is. Tuesday, November 12th, 1968. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. Good night.
This stewardess flying over South America is serving Sanka coffee to a man who doesn't know it's Sanka.
Where are you from, sir?
Panama.
To enjoy ourselves today?
I usually enjoy Brandon, yes.
Did you like our coffee?
It's very good, as a matter of fact. Tastes like the coffee I have at home, which is very good coffee.
You know it was Sanka coffee.
This is Sanka?
This is surprising Sanka coffee, 97% caffeine free. But caffeine adds no taste to coffee.
Gravy Train by Gaines. Makes your dog feel like Rin Tin Tin. Gravy Train isn't just stuff to fill him. It's great hunks of good food he can bite into. Add water and it makes its own gravy. Or serve it dry. Wet or dry, Gravy Train is packed with nutrition. Feed your dog Gravy Train every day. Gravy Train makes a dog feel like Rin Tin Tin.
Direct from our newsroom in New York, in color, this has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.